Hello again and welcome to another Mordian Glory Warhammer 40k video. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the low down, dirty, deceiving topic of cheating. And recently, it seems there has been a few high-profile cases of cheating, of people being very naughty. And what I want to do today is have a little look at some of the old school methods that have been cropping up again. Things that I have not seen in a long time, in over a decade, and also to allay some of the concerns that I have received from my community about cheating and about making rules mistakes in general. So without further ado, let's not mess around any further. Let's load our crossbows and charge right into today's episode. ACHTUNG conscripts! Warlord Games is now an official sponsor of the Mordian Glory channel. And not only that, they have given me an affiliate link which I have popped down in the description below. By using that link, you can get your hands on some awesome World War II bolt action miniatures and at the same time support the Mordian Glory channel. You have all of my ideas, so what are you waiting for? Do the right thing and buy yourself some bolt action today. So the first thing that I want to do is talk about how cheating has kind of changed recently and why I'm saying that these old school techniques of cheating are on the rise. Over the course of end of 7th edition and 8th edition, and a little bit of 9th edition as well, the typical way that someone would get caught out for cheating, or typical way that someone would try and cheat, is essentially by browbeating their opponent into believing a rule worked a certain way, or by purposefully leaving out a key part of a rule to try and give you a good advantage. So an example of this would be someone might use the tank shock stratagem, which says you can only do a maximum of 6 mortal wounds from this stratagem, but they just leave that part out. And then they roll a whole bunch of dice and they get super lucky and they end up doing 7 or 8 mortal wounds. Now, if that's an honest mistake, then fair enough, that is an honest mistake. But when it's cheating is when you know that it's not going to work that way, but you realize that your opponent maybe doesn't have as much knowledge of the game as you. And so the way that you tend to find people cheated more recently is they would leverage their greater experience of the game to try and slip things past you, or to try and convince you that the rules did work in this particular way, in a way that always happened to conveniently benefit the person in question. Now, in order for this kind of cheating to be effective, it relies upon two things. Firstly, it relies upon someone not having a good knowledge of the game as the cheater, and so you're able to just abuse that fact that you know more about the game than them, and by displaying this knowledge, you perhaps create an element of trust, like they go, oh, well, you say it works this way, man, so I guess it does, you're a much better player, or this kind of stuff. And it also relies upon the fact that even if someone knows that they're right, that maybe they just don't like confrontation, or they're just too polite to say anything. And then by the time the incident is over, or the game's moved on, or the game has ended, because no judge has been involved, it's kind of a he said versus she said kind of thing, then there's nothing that can be done about it. So it kind of relies upon essentially just pulling the wool over your opponent's eyes, or relying upon them not saying anything and not calling you out. However, in more recent times, this kind of cheating has been harder and harder for the scumbag cheaters to pull off. And I believe the reasons for this are twofold. Firstly, there are so many online tools and resources now that it's so easy for someone to say, hang on a second, I'll just check. I'll check the FAQ. It's a searchable document. I'll check the Warhammer app. I'll check new recruit. Back in the day, someone could say it definitely worked like this because it's in the FAQ, and unless you had the FAQ printed out with you, you wouldn't be able to get access to it. Or maybe someone had printed off that version of the FAQ that was now out of date and it changed. They could say, hey, look, see, it works this way. Or maybe they just didn't have their codex on them. I mean, a very common line with this kind of scumbag behavior was, oh, well, I've forgotten my codex, or it's in the Forge World version. It's a special Forge World version. There's so many stories, people out there saying this kind of stuff. But now it's all online. It's all on the app. The rules are easy to pull up. Small side note, this is one of the reasons why I really don't like GW paywalling more and more of the Warhammer app. Beginning of 10th edition, if someone pulled this kind of stuff, you just pull out that Warhammer app and you start checking. Now you can still do it, but you have to use things like new recruit and stuff. But my point is that it's harder for people to pull the wool over people's eyes because they have at their fingertips all of the knowledge that they need. And the other reason why I think this is becoming harder for cheaters to try and pull off is because the competitive community has been maturing and evolving and developing steadily over the course of 8th, 9th, and 10th edition. 10th edition is very much the competitive first edition. We've got seasons of 40k, we have got constant FAQs, balance changes, point changes, so much so people, really don't like the pace of change with 40k. But on the whole, it's very much competitively led. And as a result, and this has been the way for a few years now, for a few editions now, and as a result, you tend to find that, there's still those people that are very polite and very nice, and maybe they won't want to have a confrontation, but a lot of people that play Warhammer competitively now are not afraid to go, hang on a second, mate, I don't think it works that way. Hang on a second, mate, I don't think that's right. Hang on a second, let's check the rules, because it's easy to do, it's convenient to do so, and they're not afraid of saying, I'm not sure it works the way. Hang on, mate, let's just get the judge over. And so as a result of people having this knowledge, and as a result, I think, of this more hardy mindset that's begun to develop, especially towards the top tables, the tournament regulars. There's so many tournament regulars out there now. What we have seen instead is people going back to old school cheating techniques. And there have been all of the classic reruns that I thought had completely died a death. At the beginning of 10th edition, there was the infamous poo dice incident. This is where someone brought loaded dice to a tournament at Element Games, and they got caught with these loaded dice, and they got caught red-handed. Like, the tournament organizers at Element made a salt bath that they could put the dice in, and so that they would float. And then they would try and roll them round. And if they would roll onto a random number, then the dice weren't weighted. And if they kept rolling onto the same numbers, then the dice were weighted. And the reason they're called the poo dice, because the guy tried to flush them down the toilet and all this kind of stuff. But weighted dice, honestly, I have not heard of anyone using weighted dice in 40k since 4th edition? 5th edition? It used to be a thing in much old editions of 40k where TOs would actually provide the dice and you had to use the dice. You couldn't use your own dice. They'd buy a whole bunch of cheap ones off eBay or something, and you had to use the dice while you're at the tournament. And that kind of stamped this out, and it sort of never came back. But beginning of 10th edition, some dude turned up with weighted dice, and it was a blast from the past. Not a good blast from the past, but it was a blast. And it was kind of crazy that this reared its head. And another time everyone went, why the hell would this guy bother using weighted dice? But again, I think it's because cheaters are going to cheat, and if certain techniques aren't working anymore, then instead they're going to come over to other techniques instead. The funny thing is though, weighted dice are the worst way you can try and cheat. Firstly, you've had to make a number of decisions before you got to the game, and even then you have another decision to make. So you made the decision first, I'm going to cheat. Then you made the decision, I'm going to go and buy these dice. Then you made the decision is, I'm going to put these in my case and I'm going to use them in the tournament. And then when you get to the tournament, you make that decision to pull out the weighted dice and to try and use them. So this is why weighted dice are so utterly reprehensible, and why they're so utterly unforgivable, and why it's almost the biggest, most worst kind of way you can try and cheat, because there were so many opportunities when the person involved could have just chosen, no, I'm just going to stop. Before this gets too far, I'm just going to stop. But no, they didn't, and they got all the way, they went through all of those hoops, and then they still decided to go and use the weighted dice. But the crazy thing is that they're really easy to spot. it's so obvious when someone uses weighted dice, because typically, in order for the cheater to know which dice are weighted, they have to be in like a different color. So you might have someone who, whenever they need to roll that charge, they always pick up their lucky blue dice. They always pick up their like lucky red dice, and all their other dice are either like a mix, or actually they don't tend to have a mix. What tends to happen is they'll have all of their like dice like one color, and then they'll have a couple of dice which are in a different color. And the reason for that is they need to be able to spot themselves when it comes to making that charge. You need to be able to pick up a couple of dice quickly and roll them. But it's super obvious when someone's got a whole bunch of like white dice and like 2 random red ones, which they always use and happen to always roll like a double 6 for the charge or something crazy. So yeah, it's very, very obvious weighted dice, and it's one of the reasons why it just got completely stamped out, was because it became very obvious and very easy to spot them, and people using them just got completely and utterly lambasted and just hounded out of the community. So weighted dice, like when I heard that one was making a comeback, I was like, no way, man. Like literally it'll just be so obvious to spot. And well, within a month of someone trying it in 10th edition, it got caught. Good. Do not use weighted dice. It is, like I said, the ultra scumbag maneuver. But hey, it was an old school technique that reared its head. Now, this idea of using like physical tools and physical props to try and bamboozle and cheat your way to victory is probably the defining part of old school cheating. You're not trying to mentally slip something past your opponent, you're physically trying to gain an advantage. Another example of this that I was surprised didn't get quite as much coverage is there was a tournament in the last sort of 6 months where someone printed out a bunch of custom data sheets, put them in a ring binder, and when their opponent asked to like check their stats, like, are you sure that Tau unit is E10? They were like, yeah, look, check my data sheet. And they tried to physically bamboozle their way past. Unfortunately, this did not fly and was very, very easy to spot, because the person that called it out went, well, mate, on the app it says this, so this is the official Warhammer app, so what's going on here? And a cursory glance at these data sheets just revealed that they were quite badly photoshopped. But again, that is an old school technique, rearing the head. People saying, oh well, in this, like, I've got the German version of the codex and it says it's this, and they've printed a version out and they've altered the data sheets. That's an old school physical tampering way. But again, it's so obvious, and there's a reason why these techniques died out. And that's why, again, I'll say it the way I say it here. If you try and print your data sheets out, you have gone through multiple steps of utter scumbaggery. Okay, you decided you were going to cheat. You decided you were going to go into the effort of digitally altering the documents. Though I'm sure it's not that hard to do this day and age, but you still had to go through the process of doing it, then printing it out, and then using it at the game. So again, these physical ways of trying to cheat, they're very old school, but they died out for a good reason, because it's incredibly easy to spot this kind of stuff. However, there are a couple of old school cheating ways that are a little bit harder to prove, a little bit harder to call out, but still have been on the rise and have been pretty quickly picked up by the community and the bullshit that they involve. The first one, which happened recently at the Tacoma Open, where an orc player conveniently forgot certain rules. So this was kind of like a new school meet old school combo, where all of his characters were T6 when they were T5. Just saying that a stat was better than it was, that was so common back in the day, because I forgot my codex, that kind of thing. I suppose that's more of a new school one, but yeah, making stats up, yeah, that was pretty old school. And then also the big one that's come up recently was modeling for advantage, and this was the final one I was waiting to come up. This is the final old school way. In I would say the trifecta of old school scumbag cheating ways. You had weighted dice, you had dodgy data sheets, and then you had modeling for advantage. Now, I've been waiting all 10th edition for someone to try it, and it recently happened. So modeling for advantage is kind of what it says on the tin. It's where you take a model and you alter it, or you take an older version of a model to try and gain an advantage out of it. So an example might be if you've got the old, like 2nd or 3rd edition Marnius Calgar model, which is on like a 25mm base and is about the size of a Gretchen, and you use that model, then yeah, technically you're using Marnius Calgar, but the advantage is that your opponent can't see him, try and like snipe him out or anything like that. So that's an example of taking an older model, although to be fair, most TOs would insist upon it being bigger, at least put on the right base size and built up to the right size. But using an old model is one way of trying to gain an advantage. Another way though is, like I said, physically altering the model. And a good example of this is back in the day, you used to get like a lot of models that were like lying or like prone. So there was some old Imperial Guard heavy weapon teams guys that were like lying down, like prone and that kind of stuff. And what you would do is you would model all of your guys so they were lying down, or they were kneeling. You get a lot of the kneeling legs from the heavy weapon teams. And that way, if you were behind a wall, your opponent couldn't see over the wall to shoot at you. And so you could hide your guys behind what should have been a piece of terrain that your opponent could see you no problem. But actually, they can't see you. Or on the flip side, you might take a third-party turret, or you take or you model a Lehman Russ turret or something, so it's got a really tall aerial, or it's got a really long barrel or something, so that you're able to poke your tank round the corner and get line of sight that you wouldn't normally have. And in this more recent incident, what happened is essentially someone had a flyer on a flying stand, and they had the flyer on a larger flying stand, so it was taller than it should have been. And as a result, and they put the flyer in hover mode, and then as a result, when someone tried to charge the flyer, when they should have been able to charge to the wing, they couldn't, because the wing was higher than it should have been, and as a result they had to charge to the base. And so it was like when you deep strike down, it was basically like an impossible charge to make on this flyer. And the TO, the judge, picked up on this and was like, no, banned, you have modeled for advantage here. There is some ambiguity around. Some people are arguing that the judge was maybe being a bit harsh in this result and all this kind of stuff, and it was just like a flying stand the guy didn't realize. But the point is that it was deemed by the judge, whatever side of the argument you fall down on, it was deemed by the judge that knowingly modeling for advantage had taken place during this tournament. And there was also a recent example at the WTC, again a little bit controversial example, but an example at WTC where someone tried to model a bunch of their characters, and they had like plasma pistols and stuff, but they weren't modeled on the models themselves. They was like on holsters on like the hip, and the WTC actually ruled that that was modeling for advantage, because if your opponent cannot at a glance see what pistol that person was modeled with, or see what combi weapon or whatever it was that that model was modeled with, then it would mean that your opponent might not realize what the threat was from that unit, and then those models were disallowed. I think that latter version was definitely maybe a bit of anal attentiveness on the WTC, but at the end of the day, that was demodeling for advantage. And this other example, was very much considered modeling for advantage by the TO. Like, you knowingly had this bigger flying stand and you shouldn't have used it. And it's this last one, though, modeling for advantage, and some of the stories that have come out about it recently, that has actually had a few people come forward to me on my live streams and say, Mordian, I'm really worried about my collection, really worried about my models, because I'm worried that because I've used third-party bits, or I've done like cool conversions and stuff, that I have inadvertently modeled for advantage, and that my opponents are going to call me out at the beginning of the game and say, no, you can't use this is bad, like, Tio, get over here, ban this guy's models. And one example that came up was with the recent Solar Auxilia tank. So a lot of guard players have been really enjoying the Solar Auxilia look of the vehicles and have been adding them into their army, but the Solar Auxilia Lehman Russ doesn't have sponsons, and so if you use that Russ, you might get accused of like modeling for advantage because the sponsons make the model a bit wider, and it means that it wouldn't be able to fit through certain gaps. And so if you don't have those sponsons on, yet you play like you've got them, maybe you model them as like a pintle mounted option instead, then are you modeling for advantage? And I had a few people reach out to me and say they're really worried because they've just finished painting a cool Solar Auxilia army that they want to use in 40k, and now they might not be able to. The number one thing to remember with cheating is it often comes down to mindset. I have mentioned this throughout this video, but you have to like make conscious decisions if you're going to cheat in these, especially old school ways. I'm going to go and buy the weighted dice. I'm going to go and print those data sheets out. If you make mistakes, or if you buy a model because you think it's cool, and then later find out that it might give you an advantage, the way that you make up for that is with your attitude. Let's take the Solar Auxiliary Lehman Russ, for example. You buy it because you think it's cool. You then realize, maybe you watch this video, you see something else out there, that, yeah, you could fit through those gaps. You shouldn't be able to, but you could do. You then go through every game and you just play it as if it is 4 or 5 inches wide rather than 3 inches wide. And when you're at the tournament and you're going through the list with your opponent and you say, by the way, this is my Solar Auxiliary Lehman Russ, it should have sponsons, I am going to play it as if it is this wide. We will always take that into account when it comes for gaps that I'm squeezing through, and we'll take that into account when you're trying to draw a line of sight to me. If I'm trying to hide behind something and you can't see me, but my sponson technically should be sticking out, we'll give you a line of sight. Your opponent is going to straight away go, okay, this guy's playing a very fair game. He didn't need to tell me any of that stuff. I don't know the difference between the two Lehman Russes. But now that we know that, we can play a fair game. Likewise, if you're going into a game and you make a mistake, there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. Just don't make the same mistake twice. And the big giveaway for whether someone is making mistakes, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, cheaty scumbag behavior, and between someone is genuinely making a mistake, is if they always make mistakes that advantage them. Sloppy play. A good example of sloppy play is this. I went to a tournament. I ran my Beastman for the first time at that tournament. I played the entire tournament as if my Dragon Ogres had 3 wounds. They have 4 wounds. I went to a tournament and I ran the entire time, so beginning 10th edition, the entire tournament, like my Chimeras had 10 wounds. Turns out they had 11 wounds. I lost a tournament. I could have podiumed and won a tournament with a Shadow Sword, but I forgot that it has the heavy rule on its main gun. And so I rolled a bunch of 2s and said they were misses, when actually they were hits. These are all times when I've made mistakes that have disadvantaged myself. But I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes that have advantaged me as well. I have made mistakes in that Beastman tournament where I thought that one of my characters had an extra attack and I played it the entire time like it had an extra attack. Turned out that the reason I thought he had an extra attack is because every time I'd played against him with Beastman, they'd given him 2 hand weapons and I just assumed that was the natural number of attacks that he had. I made that mistake. That advantaged me. But I came out and I owned that mistake, and I won't ever make that mistake again. Making mistakes is okay. Modeling your miniatures in a very cool way is okay. The important thing when it comes to mistakes is learning from them. Then they're mistakes. If you don't learn from them and you purposefully try and hide your mistakes, then you're probably cheating. And if you get a bunch of cool models and start using them to advantage, and even when it's pointed out that you shouldn't be using them that way, you still try and use them to advantage, you're probably cheating there. With this kind of stuff, if you're a new player and you're worried about this, the number one thing is honesty is the best policy. And the number one thing is if you make mistakes, own them, learn from them. And the number one thing, if you want to do cool models and conversions, that's totally okay. Just make sure that when you run them on the tabletop, and you should be okay to run them on the tabletop, you are running any possible grey areas as disadvantages to yourself. With all of this stuff, it's about vibe, it's about attitude. Well, at least that's what I think. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Why do you think we've started to see a rise of old school cheating techniques? And do you think that they're just going to die out like they did before because they're kind of obvious to spot? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bonbon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.